Howdy, howdy. Welcome back to another episode of the Relationship Schools podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gaddis. Good to be with you. When was the last time you looked someone in the eyes and said, hey, it's good to be with you. I like you and I like being with you. Try that today. This podcast is all about relationship, love, partnership, friendship, doing relationship well. Being the kind of person that after you get into a snag, you come back and clean it up. After you blame, you come back and get curious about your own experience. We're trying to help you get empowered in your relational life, all right? So if you're new, welcome. If you're returning, thanks a lot for being here again. I feel psyched about this episode because I have a third-time guest, Dr. Dan Siegel, back on the podcast. Out with his new book, The Power of Showing Up. So that's what we talked about in this book. It's really about parental presence. So this is for you parents. If you're not a parent, you have been a child of a parent, and I think you're going to learn a lot. So I please don't just be like, oh, this is for parents, I'm out of here. You can, whenever there's a parenting podcast, you can take the seat of, I know what it's like to be a child of parents, and I want to learn about, wow, how my parents did it versus what they're talking about here. And if I ever were to become a parent or an uncle or a aunt or a friend to young children or a teacher, then this will help me understand kids and how to deal with kids better. All right. I really love this. And, a lot of you do request podcasts on parenting. So this is another one. And Dan is, to me, one of the leading researchers and experts in the world on a certain kind of parenting, really attachment, science-based parenting, as he'll dive into in this episode. The value of science and research-based approaches, I think, is really important. That's why Ellen and I really lean on the deep, hard work that so many people like Dan and his mentors have done to mine the data and the information so that we can effectively teach in our programs all this awesome, awesome stuff. Okay, so we talk about secure attachment. We talk about safety. We talk about a little bit of the circuitry in the brain required to have resilient kids. This is like a really basic snapshot of what it takes to raise an awesome human being. And it's what we're practicing in our home. And I think we have awesome kids. If any of you have ever met my kids, they're pretty rad. So I could go on and on, but I'm going to save a few more thoughts for the outro around the action step. So hang in there, listen to Dan, and then if you want to continue listening to me jam for a minute, I'm gonna do that on the outro. Okay. All right, welcome back to the show, Dr. Daniel Siegel. What's up, Dan?
Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for being on again. It's always a pleasure to mine the wisdom of all your hard work, so thank you.
My pleasure.
So today I want to dive into your new book, The Power of Showing Up. I'm really psyched. I've read it, and along with, I've got Aware here, I've got Developing Mind over here that I want to, if we have time, I got some questions for you. But we're going to try
doing a lot of reading, Jason.
Yeah, my wife and I are Dan Siegel geeks.
Okay.
So hopefully we're gonna mostly zero in on just parenting and really secure attachment, parent to child today.
Great.
Yeah, because this book is just, I think it's really awesome for it's so accessible. So thanks for making it that way. I really want to get into the 4 S's and really secure attachment as parents and what we parents can do to help raise, securely attached, resilient, awesome kids who go out and conquer the world. But first I want to just kind of zoom out and talk about just kids these days, if we can for a minute.
Absolutely.
It seems to me that, and this is partly coming from teachers I've talked to, my own experience of looking around, working with clients, my own life, and it's really like this observation that kids are a little more boundaryless, maybe, in a certain way. more distractible, and less kind of respectful of sort of the rules of like sitting still and just listening. And granted, classes have gotten bigger, and there's all kinds of challenges, screens, and there's a lot going on. So I'm just curious, like, is that true that things are really different in terms of how children's behavior is showing up these days versus, say, even 20 years ago?
Well, it's a really interesting question, Jason. I don't know how you would actually do the careful scientific study to say, yes, it's absolutely different. There are scientific surveys that tell us, for example, kids are more anxious than they were 20 years ago, that kids are feeling more depressed. There's increased suicide attempts and completed suicides, even in young people, so.
And 10 million kids are on medications, under the age of 17. And 10 million kids are on medication under the age of 17.
Yeah, and a lot more kids are on medication, exactly. So these are the statistics that we can turn to support what you're saying and say, yeah, something is different. Now, you're asking specifically about, boundaries and, are kids feeling boundaryless? So I'm not sure how we would address that specific question you have, but we can definitely say something's happening in the world where resilience seems to be challenged as kids go out into the world, or even when they're still at home. And so we can ask the question, how does resilience develop in children? And could it be that kids are becoming less resilient? And that would be a way of, asking the question, is it, boundaryless? Is there a lot of anxiety, depression, and a feeling of, chaos and despair really going on? And so I think the answer is yes, it's something to be concerned about. And then we can then look at these studies of attachment and say what might be causing it, and then what can we do as parents to try to give our kids a kind of internal compass that can guide them, especially through hard times.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. So just a few other points on kind of the big picture, and then we can dive into some of the points in your book. Just when I track children, just because I have two kids, 11 and 9 now, and they're at a class or a gym or wherever, I just notice that parents seem to have less command of their children. And when I was growing up, it was more of a fear-based kind of parenting approach. Spanking and threats, and like parents did the best they could, but they used maybe more, because they had less education, maybe more fear of like, hey, if you don't comply and sit still and respect your elders or whatever, then X is going to happen to you. So parents maybe have gone in the other direction, is sort of my, without obviously heavy research here, this is just my experience, just observation. Like, I wonder if we've gone in the other direction where it's like parents feel frozen a little bit and they're not sure what to do because they don't want to do that, right? They don't want to go back in time and use fear and aggression and threatening. But now we're like bribing kids with the phone. Okay, you can have, the phone if you behave. It's like a new form of sugar. I think this is pretty dangerous because of the amount of kids in airports. Even when I'm at the airport, just the families I see on screens, no one's talking to each other. No one's looking around at all the amazing, beautiful people. They've got headphones on and they're just buried in their games. And these are 2 to 4-year-olds sometimes. So I'm just like, wow, is this like an attachment issue? Is this a parents being scared, they don't know what to do issue? What's going on?
Right. It's a really terrific question, Jason, I got to say, because first of all, you're pointing out that maybe in the past coercion was used with threats and intense, negative feelings. And one hypothesis you're making is, well, maybe parents don't feel empowered to use methods that maybe in the past they were using. So that's a researchable question. And it's complicated because, just like you're noting, there are a lot more things going on than parents perhaps changing their strategy. Parents are not parenting. That's really what's going on, right. I think.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? Well, if you just take the simple study by Andrew Meltzoff and Patricia Kuehl that showed basically with these tapes where you're supposed to learn a foreign language, or actually learn just a language acquisition for like a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old. These videotapes were touted to, increase, language learning. So they studied it at the University of Washington, and they found kids learned less language when they were just on a screen.
Interesting.
And it isn't that the videotapes were bad, making language development slow down or something. It was just that what the researchers hypothesized was that they were not having face-to-face time where the relationships that they could have would be changing the way the brain develops in very specific ways that have a lot to do with language acquisition, awareness of the inner world of oneself, awareness of the inner world of others. And it's that inner awareness of self and other that forms the basis of being compassionate and empathic and kind, of being self-aware, of having what you could simply call an internal compass. So to build on what you're saying, when you say you're going to the airport and see everyone's on their individual, gadgets, those gadgets are keeping us from connecting with one another. And it's the connections with one another that build the connections in the brain that are the source of resilience.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I was at a party recently and I heard people talk about their work in college and the kids seem so fragile and disconnected. And this is the generation now of kids who've been raised on these smartphones.
Yeah.
Right. So I have a son who's 30 and a daughter who's going to be 26. Our son didn't have those things when he was going through. And our daughter just began to have it. But now the kids are just in college now, they are immersed in this world. And, the circuitry, I call it mind-sight circuitry, the circuitry that allows you to know your own mind and the mind of others is exactly what you need for resilience in this life. And if you don't develop those mind-sight circuits, the attachment research says, you're going to have all sorts of challenges with regulating your emotions, keeping yourself clear-minded in the face of stress, connecting with other people in mutually rewarding ways, and having a kind of flexibility to how your awareness works. So basically, you can simply call it showing up for others and yourself. So you're kind of present in life. And I think the sadness you're describing about the airport, view is that you feel like there's all these beautiful people who are not realizing they're there. They're not showing up for each other. And I'm concerned about that too, like you are.
Yeah. I mean, my kids are like knitting, they're like, because we're not that we're, quote, better than any of these people. It's just that we have a high value on attachment and connection, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, attachment, it's so interesting. Attachment, I know there are strategies of attachment that people use to name their parenting approach that actually have nothing to do with attachment science.
Yep.
So let's just be really, really clear. How Jason and I are using attachment is about the science of attachment, not just a word we're using. It's a discipline in the field of child psychology that studies parent-child relationships. And now the longest longitudinal study has been going on for over 40 years. So we were able to study, families before a child was born, study them in the first year of life, study them periodically now into their 40s. And we can talk about, how the experiences we have early in life actually shape who we become.
Totally. What's the name of that study, Dan?
So that's the Minnesota longitudinal study by Alan Sroufe, Sroufe.
Yeah. Okay. You quote him sometimes in your books. All right, cool. I'm glad you mentioned the sort of, let's be accurate with the definition. I live in Boulder, and there can be a lot of people sort of touting maybe attachment parenting, but to me it looks like over-attachment parenting, meaning if I hold my kid all the time and I co-sleep with my kid all the time and they're just with me all the time, that's somehow secure attachment. And my wife wrote a great blog post on this, challenging this sort of assumption, because that leads to a under-resourced parent who gets angry and resentful and doesn't feel like they have any space and wants to pull their hair out. So will you say something about the sort of what I'm talking about there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so attachment theory and research is a discipline in the study of child development that's a part of child psychology. So it's an academic pursuit. So I'm trained in attachment research. So I have a fellowship I did through the National Institute of Mental Health to become a researcher studying parent-child relationships. And specifically in that field, we study how the way parents communicate with children shape the long-term outcome of how that child's mind develops, whether they're going to develop resilience or not, for example. And Alan Srofe, the person who was the main investigator for the Minnesota study that's now over 40 years long, he and I wrote a little paper you can get from my website called "The Verdict is In." And we summarized that, over 40-year study in about 6 pages in this little article, because we wanted to really make the findings accessible. So if you go to the website, drdansiegel.com, just go to resources and just find "The Verdict is In" by Alan Srofe and me.
Great.
So anyway, Alan Srofe, Mary Main, lots of other people, these are the leaders in the field of attachment that was formed by Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby. Yep. And there's a whole rigorous science where you can very systematically study parent-child interactions in the first year of life, find a measure called the infant strange situation, where you can measure very distinct patterns that children respond to a separation paradigm, especially when they have a reuniting with their parent after a 3-minute separation. And then you can show that the best predictor of how children turn out is whether they have a secure attachment or not, which is a certain way you measured this in the infant strange situation. And about, somewhere between 55 and 65% of the population have this secure attachment as a baseline. And then there are various forms of non-secure attachment. And then we can study that. And then we can ask the question, well, what's the best predictor of, those forms of attachment? And it turns out that something called the adult attachment interview, which is what I'm trained to administer, is a research instrument that basically says to a parent, hey, what happened to you when you were a kid? Yeah. And then there's these systematic questions. And parents who've had horrible, horrible things happen to them in their childhood, but whose description of how they've made sense of their life and what happened to them and understanding its impact on them, how they've taken the time to develop what's called a coherent narrative, they'll have kids who are securely attached to them. Whereas another person who had a similar set of adverse experiences in their own childhood, who didn't make sense of it, who still have unresolved issues, if you will, unresolved trauma, unresolved loss, leftover garbage, they will, to various extents, have children who have very problematic attachments to them, insecure attachments. Yep. So this, to me, was like an amazing finding I learned back in 1985, which now I can't believe that's 35 years ago. So then what I did as a therapist is I started using the adult attachment interview for all my patients, and over the last 35 years. And then what I did was I started writing books, like a book called The Developing Mind, which you have there, which tries to say, why does making sense of your life as a parent have the most robust, the strongest influence on whether your child has a secure attachment or not? So that book is all about that question. Yeah. And in 2 days, I'm going out to dinner with my teachers, Mary Main and Eric Hesse, who are the leaders in that, who taught me the adult attachment interview. And it's so much fun to continue my connection with them, because their visionary leadership in saying, look, it's not what happened to you where you can't do anything about what happened to you, but you can go back and make sense of what happened to you so that your adaptations to that can be liberated. So this is one of the most optimistic scientific findings. That's what attachment research is really telling us, is make sense of your life. And then what do you do with your kid? You show up for them in these ways we can describe. And the showing up phrase it's just these S's that, I created years ago to try to summarize what my colleagues in attachment research had been carefully, figuring out across cultures, what's the crucial ingredient to develop security for your kid, no matter what culture you're in around this earth. And so these 4 S's are my way of summarizing it. And then Tina Payne Bryson and I we love the term showing up. So we applied the 4 S's to this notion of just showing up. This is how you show up. And the book is really translating this huge field of attachment, which I now have in the 3rd edition of Developed Mind. I'm just finishing those revisions, and then fueling the power of showing up is this review of, literally thousands of scientific articles that support what's said in the power of showing up.
Yeah, and it's great. Hello there. If you want to learn how to work through conflict, guys, you got to step up your game, okay? We have twice a year an event just devoted to conflict. It's called Accepted and Connected. Check out what Heidi had to say about our event.
I've been following Jason since the beginning, and I'm actually a relationship coach, not trained here, but this is what I do. And so I wanted to come and have this experience. I came with my husband, and I just think that the tools that are available here are fresh, they're current, they're usable, and we're seeing, like in this weekend, how people are transforming right in front of our eyes. The level of thought and care that's gone into creating the techniques, all the things that we're learning are really honed skills that I think everybody can use with a little bit of coaching. They're not complicated. And so I think that it has like sort of wide-reaching appeal. You can see in the room that there are so many different people coming from so many different backgrounds and how everybody is impacted. There's nothing better out there. That's really what I think. There's nothing better out there.
Damn. Thanks, Heidi. Fun to have you and your guy here. All right. If you want to sign up, it's probably wise to do so you can catch our deals. You can bring a friend for free. There's sort of some details about that. So just go to relationshipschool.com/connected. All right. Find out all the goodies, and we'll see you here in Boulder, Colorado. Back to the podcast. So why don't we get into those? And I appreciate the back context because I think that's really important for the listener to get that this is like backed by research, tons of years and years of hard work and observation. What exactly so you're defining secure attachment as really what's the best predictor is a parent's ability to have a coherent narrative about their life, right? And I really see that in myself. I see that in the people I work with. So given that, okay, if that's secure attachment, You've outlined these 4 S's that I think are really brilliant in terms of simplifying all it takes to create that. So will you cover these 4 S's?
Absolutely. So the first thing to say, Jason, as we get into this is anyone, joining us here should just know that there's no such thing as perfect parenting. And one of the major lessons that a friend and colleague, Ed Tronick, has beautifully researched is that, while we're about to describe the ideal situation of these 4 S's, people mess up all the time and there's disconnection when there should be connection. And sometimes you scare your kid, all this stuff. So just know there's no such thing as perfect parenting. But if you have a direction you're trying to go, when you deviate from that direction and you go, whoops, oh my God, I didn't mean to, not attune to my kid or scare my kid by accident or whatever. Let me take a deep breath. Let me realize there's a rupture or a break in connection. And let me realign what I'm doing to make a reconnection, or in the research literature, it's called a repair. Yep. So it's this rupture repair cycle. And what Ed Tronick beautifully showed is that, lots of times we're not as connected as we want to be, but making repair is the crucial thing. So that's the first thing to start with. Right. Now, keeping that in the front of your mind as Jason and I go through these S's, if you're hearing this and you go, oh my God, I didn't do that today, or, whatever, take a deep breath and say, that's fine. That's fine. You can change the direction of what you're doing and be informed by these things, not imprisoned by these S's, but just inspired by them. Yeah. And to give you a kind of directionality that doesn't imprison you. It just gives you a sort of, in physics called a vector, a kind of direction, and you aim in that direction. Okay. Right. So the first S is the main purpose of attachment is safety. The reason we, for 200 million years, have had attachment in our mammalian history is because the babies that are born to mammals are really very not independent. They need us to survive. So that's really true with primates and especially true with humans. We have the most dependency of any species. If you look at the ratio of the time our kids are with us and dependent on us to the full length of the lifespan. It's like wild, especially now that kids are staying with us into their 30s and 40s. It's a long time.
Yeah.
But that's fine. But what that means is that safety is the number one thing. So safety has two parts. Protect your child from harm, which is natural, The second thing is that try your best not to be the source of fear or terror or disorientation. And if you are, like with all these, please take a deep breath. On the one hand, make a repair with your child. And on the other hand, also explore what was going on with you, that a hot button got pushed. You did things that were terrifying to your kid because you were confused and disoriented, or you're yelling at your spouse, or you're yelling at your kid, or even sometimes abusing them. So there's a whole range of things that we do, unfortunately, as parents that can terrify and disorient our kids. And the reason that's a problem is because one network in your child's brain says, if I'm being terrified, I should get away from the source of terror. Makes sense. Another network is the attachment network that says, wow, I'm a mammal. So if I'm terrified, I need to go to my attachment figure to be protected. That makes sense too. So if you, as the attachment figure, the parent, are a source of terror in your child's brain, one network says, oh my God, I gotta get away from my parent because they're terrifying me. The other network says, oh, I'm terrified, I gotta go to my parent, they'll protect me. Well, one body cannot go both toward and away from the same individual, right?
Yeah.
So there's a collapse in the strategies of attachment. And this is the most concerning form of attachment, called disorganized attachment.
Yeah.
And it's related to trouble connecting with other people, with regulating your emotions. And it has the clinical finding of what's called dissociation. And, we used to say that in the non-clinical population, it was around 5 to 15% of the population. But in doing the third edition of Developing Mind, some recent study shows it's somewhere around, average of about 30% of the population.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And obviously in high risk individuals, families, it's much higher, like 70% or plus. But I was amazed. I couldn't believe when I saw that when I'm going over the things I've been working on for 3 years, revising this book. So I went back to the source, and sure enough, there was the number, between 20 and 40%.
Wow.
So that's high, average 30%.
Yeah.
So
just tracking the time too. Just we have about 10 minutes left. So just if
we can do
3.
15. We're good.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the first S, safety. The second S is seen, which means that your parent is going to see your mind, your feelings, your inner life of thoughts, your memories, your perceptions, your beliefs, your hopes, your dreams, all that stuff of the inner subjective life. So that if you fall down, for example, instead of just seeing your physical event of falling, your parent says, oh, sweetie, you fell down. That must have been scary for you. So that simple communication, I see your body with my eyes, but I have another kind of sight besides physical sight, and I call it mind sight. I see that there was a subjective experience of fear or surprise or shock or sadness or humiliation or whatever it was, and I tune into the subjective experience of what you're having right now, and that's called mind sight. And those are called reflective dialogues. And amazingly, it's quite simple. Parents who use mind sight to have reflective dialogues using words to talk about the inner mental life of their child, they have children who develop insight, empathy, and compassion. They have more emotional and social intelligence, and they're able to regulate their inner emotional state with much more resilience. It's remarkable.
Yeah, unbelievable. Totally. I mean,
It's
it makes so
unbelievable.
much sense, though.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's like learning a skill. Like if you don't teach a kid to ride a tricycle, they won't ride a tricycle. If you don't teach a kid to learn about their mind, they won't learn about their mind. So you are the first teacher as the parent. And the good news is in all these books, whether it's the ones I've done with Tina, or the one I wrote with Mary Hartzell, Parenting from the Inside Out, they're all about making sense of your life, the Inside Out book, and about how you cultivate mindsight in your child.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. So the third S, you have safe, seen. The third S is soothed. And what this means is that you bring your parental presence, your receptive, open, accepting awareness, so that your child in distress senses that you're not backing away from their distress. You're not saying, don't feel what you feel. You're not saying, I'm freaking out, or you're not over-identifying with them. You're maintaining your integrity. So it's a differentiated thing. And you're linking and saying, whatever you feel is okay. I'm here with you in your distress. And in that joining is the soothing. And amazingly, some people say, well, isn't it true that you're going to spoil your child by being so sensitive to them? And the research shows just the opposite. That when you teach a child through your relational connections that you can be there for them and show up for them and soothe them, to see them, to keep them safe, all these S's, they actually develop the more autonomous capacity to soothe themselves.
So cool.
Yeah. And all of that develops the fourth S of security. And, security in research terms, we call it a mental model or a schema. One way to think about it is just kind of a frame of mind that says, hey, when things didn't go right, my dad, my mom, my other attachment figure, they repaired what wasn't right. So even if there were times I was scared, they came back and said, oh my God, I didn't mean to scare you.
Yeah, I messed up.
I'm so sorry. Let's talk about it, Or, if I wasn't seen and they missed an opportunity to see, they came back and repaired that. Or if they didn't soothe me, they repaired it. And when I learned that things that don't go right can be repaired, and I realized I can be soothed when I'm distressed, seen for who I am inside, and kept safe, I developed this overall frame of mind, this mental model, this schema that says, I can know my own inner life. I can know your inner life. And I can share your inner life with my inner life in a mutually rewarding way, so that it's not that I'm entitled, it's more that I feel good in my own skin. I'm happy with who I am. I have resilience.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm able to join with others so that together, we can have a mutually exciting, rewarding relationship.
Totally. Great.
Security.
So we got safety, safe, seen, soothed, and security.
That's it.
And I love, the one thing I want to add that's also in your books is this notion of the secure base, which is essentially, I love your metaphor of it's a launching pad, right? And it's a safe harbor. And that's what this promotes, right? Like if I'm a kid and I get kind of beat up by life, the first place I want to go is home so that I can be taken care of, right? That's the safe harbor. And as I kind of, deal with my wounds and mom and dad believe in me and stuff, I can go back out in the world and meet the challenges, right? So I really love that metaphor.
And I think, Jason, that's such a beautiful way you're describing it because, attachment and parenting are just such a beautiful and hard role that we play.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And when you think of it that way, they've got these two things. Some people call it like, roots and wings, and there's all sorts of beautiful poetic metaphors. The metaphor we use is just like you're saying, a safe harbor where you literally have this big embrace for your child's whole life,
Yeah.
And you're this really strong, stable launching pad. So they're going to take off, not just when they go to high school, but even when they're in preschool and elementary school and middle school, and high school. And then they come back and land on the launching pad and go into the safe harbor. And, I've got a daughter who's 25 and a son who's 30. And I'm telling you, when you really see this as a relationship that you're cultivating with these S's, as your kids become young adults, it's one of the most magnificent things to just be able to, realize you're on this journey of life with them, and life is not easy. And you can just join with them. Now you're in a different role when they're adults, but it's just this beautiful thing to maintain a relational perspective that holds these S's in mind, and still your kids will come to you as a safe harbor when they need to.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
and I love Gabor Mate's book about hold on to your kids. It's also like if we don't do that, then they go to their peers, which aren't exactly the safe harbor. It feels that way to a kid, but they can't remotely provide what a parent can provide.
Yeah, I know Gabor writes about that, and we have a disagreement, I'm going to say, Jason, about it.
Yeah, let's
and
hear it.
we've talked about it. Because if you look at Barbara Natterson Horowitz's incredible book called Wildhood, which looks at adolescence across species, even lobsters have adolescents, you realize that pushing away from parents is actually a very natural thing that we've been doing for hundreds of millions of years. And so I actually don't agree with the idea of hold on to your kids. What I don't like about that phrase, that it feeds into a lot of parents' terror about supporting their kid as a launching pad to actually go out and explore, which adolescents actually really need to do. Now, is it true that we need to change the way we relate to our kids? In the book I wrote, Brainstorm, is very different from Gabor's viewpoint, where I basically say, look, not hold on to your kids, but actually maintain your communication lines open with your kids. And as the world changes, as those communication lines stay open, you're going to have a relationship with them that will alter as they go through the adolescent period. And so, that's the stance I would just say about that. And and I think, attachment, and there's a whole section on attachment in Brainstorm, that builds actually in a beautiful way on, what we're talking about the power of showing up. Yeah. But it's a shift in what you do as an attachment figure. And so Brainstorm goes through that in great detail, because what you want to do, if you think about it, kids up to, let's say, around 11, 12, 13, they're very dependent on us. What happens in adolescence is they move from the dependency to a transition period toward the interdependence of adulthood. Mm-hmm. But this transition period is tough, and it's longer than it's ever been. Yeah. And there's no question we need to maintain those lines of communication. I think Gabor would agree with that. But at the same time, there's all sorts of evolutionarily built-in systems of the remodeling adolescent brain that gets them to do things I call the essence, have an emotional spark, ES, this social engagement that they need to be doing, this novelty seeking, which they need to be doing, and this creative exploration, which they need to be doing, this essence acronym. And when you look at it from that way, then you can see, how do I maintain my safe harbor and secure launching pad differently now with my adolescent? Yeah. And maintaining those lines of communication in the relationship.
Yeah, cool. And I would recommend the book Brainstorm also. I read that one, and it's really where I first heard the 4 S's, and it was like, oh, my major light bulbs went off. Okay, as we wind down, Dan, because I know you have limited time, a couple quick questions. You've said a couple of times that, like, most people, I don't know, I've heard different stats. Today you said that basically 40 to 50% of the population is securely attached. I
know 60, 50, half to 65%.
Okay.
66, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
50 to 60.
A little over half.
When I hear that, and then I look around at my own experience, I just can't make sense of that. So can you point us to the study that says that? Because when I look around at our culture, I see a bunch of insecurely attached people staring at their phones, looking for attachment, but not actually doing it that well with other human beings. I'm just curious about where that research comes from.
So Jason, these are studies of the infant strange situation. So before a kid gets a cell phone.
Okay.
I
was like looking at adults. I'm like,
no. Yeah. These are studies of 1-year-olds and their primary caregiver. The way the research protocols work, it's really hard to assess actually between the age of 18 months and, let's say, 15 or 16 years, when you can give the adult attachment interview to an adolescent, actually. Although it's hard to know what to do with the results. But the bottom line is, it's hard to measure attachment during childhood and even early adolescence. So we're talking about 1-year-olds before they're exposed to media. Now, what's interesting is that some studies show that security is going from 66%, 2/3, to about a half. So it looks like it might be going down. Other studies don't agree with that. And the issue there is, when we do see kids then growing into their childhood and into their adolescence, and they're busy on devices, or they're not having the connection that we're talking about of the 4 S's, you're asking a really powerful question. What's the relational security that kids are developing as they go past that 1-year mark?
Yeah. Exactly.
And you're probably having very accurate observations that, John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, they would have really agreed with you. They would say, look, these working models of attachment are called working models because they're always being worked on.
Yeah.
And you can go from security as a 1-year-old to insecurity as an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
Now, we have a hard time measuring it.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the research protocol. It's just really hard to measure it. But the issue there is that you may be having the right intuition, even if the 1-year-olds are securely attached. So this is to directly address your question. But the second thing to say is, the research suggests that before kids get into adolescence, if they've got this great connection with you, they're going to have not a perfect adolescence, but they're going to have a kind of internal compass where they know themselves. So as they start to navigate the difficult waters of adolescence, they're going to have a more resilient time. Mm-hmm. That the research is really clear. So that what we would hope is that even with all the devices going on, people will realize that the art of conversation, the art of developing mindsight and seeing one another, really having empathy, compassion, and kindness, these are the measures of a positive outcome, not where you go to college or what your grade point average is, but are you kind to others? Right. Are you compassionate and empathic with others? Do you have kindness toward your inner life? Do you have kindness toward what your own history is? And this measure of, quote, success as kindness and compassion is something that attachment research really would support. And even the studies of social and emotional intelligence would say, if you're a parent listening to us and you want your kid to thrive, then show up for them in all the ways we're doing. And that doesn't mean to pressure you. It's more an invitation. Come join in this deep science of how to cultivate thriving in your child.
Absolutely. And it's not about perfection like Dan said earlier. This is just about, you fell down, now get back up and show back up for your child, right? And keep learning, right? And learning about your own
learning.
history.
Lifelong learning is how Mary Hartson and I would talk about it. And and that's such a beautiful way of talking about it, is that we're all on this journey as lifelong learners,
Yeah. Cool. As we end, on page 64 of your book, you say it's good news. Even if you didn't have a secure attachment, and this is for the parents, you can still provide it, right? A parent can still learn how to do this.
Right. And, whether it's power of showing up or parenting the inside out or doing your own inner work, this is the amazing and scientifically supported, optimistic and realistic positive statement. You can take the time to say, what happened to me? I can't change what happened to me, but if I go through the journey of reflecting on the past, saying, wow, here are the things that happened to me that were positive. Here are the things that weren't so positive. Here's how I adapted to those things. Whoa. And you can read all these books to help guide you through that journey of making sense. Then you go, I see, I have a longing for connection that was never fulfilled. So I covered it up with a kind of an illusion of autonomy and separation. Yeah. But actually, I feel kind of lonely. So let me try to really now make connection. I don't know how to do it, but I can do it step by step. These are changes, like in the book Mindsight, you'll see case studies of people when we realized through the adult attachment interview, they had this attachment or that attachment. How do you go from, as an adult, realizing you have a form of insecure attachment, even disorganized attachment, and then move towards resolving trauma, resolving loss, or even moving from various forms of insecurity to the freedom of secure attachment.
Yeah, beautiful. It reminds me of sort of myself at 29 when I made that shift, and from isolation and I'm fine on my own, which is so just dominant in our culture, right? To actually, I need other people. I want to be with other people. It's somewhere in my heart. So yeah, I'm living an example.
That's about a fifth of the population, Jason, has it. About 20% of the non-clinical population running around survive their childhood by saying, I don't need anybody.
Yep. Yeah, and that's how they're living their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, cool. Well, Dan, thanks so much for coming back and showing up yourself.
Pleasure. Thank you for showing up, Jason. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah. Where can people find the book?
Anywhere where books are sold, independent bookstores, dependent bookstores, whatever kind of bookstores there are. I haven't seen it yet in those little neighborhood library little houses they have hanging on trees, but I'm sure one day it'll be there. Libraries, anywhere. Get it anywhere you can get a book. And thank you for showing up for everyone here, Jason. It's been a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, you got it. Great to see you again. I hope to come out to LA again and study or learn or see you
please
or something.
Do. That'd be great to see you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Hey guys, action step here. Go buy Dan Siegel's new book, The Power of Showing Up. I really think it's one of the best parenting books I've read because it's so straightforward around these 4 S's. And we teach a version of these 4 S's in our programs because it's such an awesome model. And I modify it a little bit for adult relationships. I think you're going to appreciate that if you ever take a class with us, if you ever join our conflict weekend, Accepted and Connected, or our 9-month training. Okay. So Power of Showing Up by Dan and Tina Payne Bryson. She's co-authored a couple books with Dan on parenting. All right. Next action step, and of course he can be at drdansiegel.com. Okay. And the research studies he mentioned, I'm going to have our guy put those in the show notes, Luis, if you can do that. Hopefully he did that. And let me reflect on a few things here. So first of all, I just want to reiterate, okay, to become a strong parent of however your kids, whatever kind of kids you have, if you can create a coherent narrative about your life, that is the single biggest predictor of secure attachment, which then leads to all this other stuff you want for your kid. Resiliency, social and emotional intelligence, better performance in school, better social relationships. The list goes on in terms of the benefits when you have a strong connection with your kid throughout life. So I don't know if there's any more important work than raising a human being in a good way to change the world, which is why I'm on this mission to reach 1 million teens and 10 million families. This is critical for us to tackle as how do we individually raise a child. It's maybe by far the hardest thing to do in life, but maybe one of the most rewarding for those of you who choose parenting, and I highly recommend it. But only if you're up for getting your ass kicked a lot, and because it's hard, it's intense. So a couple other quick reflections. I thought it was cool what he's, I like it when guests challenge other guests. Him just saying, hey, Gabor, I disagree slightly. He does that respectfully. I've had other people sometimes disagree and, after the episode. So it's just cool to, it's like, guys, sometimes we're going to disagree. A lot of you are disagreeing with what I'm saying at times, and that's okay. All right. And if we were in a professional relationship, maybe you'd tell me. That's okay. All right. Yeah. I did not get to a lot of the folks in the Facebook group, your questions, which, guys, sorry about that. And we had limited time. The guy gave me 40 minutes and I was like, dude, I have loads of questions. And as you can see, some of his questions, take a while. So, I chose not to ask these questions, and I'm just going to fire off a couple of your questions here and refer you back to the podcast because there was so much goodness here that I think Dan answered most of your questions. Christina, you ask, how do you work with your partner whose parenting style is different from your attachment parenting style? That's actually a good question. My 2 cents is you parent your kids in the way that you want to, the way we're talking about here, let's say, because you're the one learning. They parent your kids in their way. And if you guys are co-parents and not together anymore, that's easier actually when you're not in the same homes. If you're in the same home, I would continue to support you to have really kind respectful dialogue about it. And maybe even share this book and say, here's what I'm learning about how, I think we're on the same page that we want our kids to be successful. This guy, Dan Siegel, has this great book. We might, read this together, or would you be willing to read this because it's all about kids being successful? Most people want their kids to be awesome and healthy and safe, etc. So I think that's where you align, and then it's about the how, right? Amanda, what should I do if my 13-month-old has attachment issues? Whenever I leave the house or leave her with someone other than my husband or mom, she loses her mind and screams. Please help. Well, I would say there's probably something going on there for you. That's okay. Parents can leave. It's that you can come back. Your 13-month-old might have an injury there, a past hurt, and is freaking out thinking you're going to go away forever. That's probably what she's screaming about. Or he, I think you said, her. I would, again, keep working on yourself and be okay with her freaking out. That sometimes, and continue to tell her mommy is coming back and actually coming back and really making those reunions really awesome. But it has me get curious about if anything happened earlier than that. Yeah. This is an interesting one. Sherry, when your kid goes to college and still wants you to show up in the same way, how do you help build their own attachment to self? Well, as you heard Dan say, he's saying what builds security within oneself is a secure relationship by the parent. So it has me get curious about what your relationship used to be like. Sherry, I know you recently in the last few years have really been working hard on yourself. I don't know your former life or before we met what you were doing, but chances are there was some insecurity going on, right? In your relationship, and you didn't know as much, whatever, things happened, you had a partner that wasn't willing, whatever, was going on. So you continue to be the source of security and believe in them and push them, as Dan's saying, not holding on to them, but encouraging them to go out and spread their wings. Yeah. Sharon, I think the best episode for blended families and parenting is back to the Jay and Tammy podcast, just, 20 podcasts ago. Look up that episode, Jay and Tammy, on blended families and co-parenting. Amy, how can a divorced parent of teenage boys continue to foster secure attachment when a parent declines to move out of state? Again, read Dan's book. He's got some interesting stuff, I think, in that ballpark direction. Interesting, Jennifer. Okay, so I just wanted to comment on a few of you. Yeah. Yeah, you guys are all asking really good questions in here that I don't want to drag this podcast on and on. So let's start with reading Dan's book. I think that's, for a lot of you, if you're really interested, I just get his book and read it. It's a very straightforward read. Some of his books are really, nerded out and a little too challenging for most of us. The Developing Mind is a deep read. Aware, one of his newest books, is also pretty intense. This book with Tina, I think Tina is a great balance for him because it's very accessible. There's lots of drawings, diagrams, stuff that I like because I'm visual. Okay. And as usual, if you want to join this group, go to relationshipschool.com/community. There's a great community of people respectfully trying to, learn more about relationships. If you want to take the next step with us, go to relationshipschool.com/connected. That's our next big event here in Boulder. Would love to see you out here, guys. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Relationship School fans and Smart Couple listeners, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, all right? Do us a favor, subscribe, share one of these videos with a friend, all right? We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships, and you are one of them, so thank you.